Recently, I rewatched the entirety of the 1978 Space Pirate Captain Harlock TV series. This series, along with the Galaxy Express 39 movie, have served as my formal introduction to the works of Leiji Matsumoto and Ren Taro. It is an absolute classic that, in my eyes, holds up pretty well over 40 years later, with its captivating story, lovable characters, and some very stylish shots. Chances are, you may not have heard of this series, or even this character, if you reside in the good old US of A. However, thankfully, you don't have to go very far should you be curious enough to check it out for yourself. The entire series was released on DVD by Discotek Media in 2013, and Toei has put it on a multitude of streaming platforms, including Crunchyroll, where it can be viewed without needing a premium subscription. However, no matter what platform you prefer to watch it on, depending on your anime viewing preferences, you may be deterred from watching it, as there's seemingly no English dub. However, that's not to say nobody tried to localize and dub our gallant space pirate in his heyday, and today, we're taking a look back at all of the dubbing attempts for the original Space Pirate Captain Harlock anime. So with that said, I'll be your captain. Come follow my lead as I show you wonders from the video rental store that you've never seen, and let's take to the sky.
Take to the sky. Take to the sky. Take to the sky with me.
The first American company to get their hands on the licensing for Captain Harlock was Ziv International, a television syndication company who at some point in the late 70s and early 80s got in the business of licensing several properties from Toei. However, the anime properties they accrued were seemingly sat on until a few years later, in 1982, when they had a partnership with VHS distributor Family Home Entertainment. Among the first wave of titles released by FHE, one of them was Captain Harlock, and then a year later, they would release another tape, also just called Captain Harlock. But this is only the beginning of the weirdness. The first tape begins with an all-new bombastic opening song called Take to the Sky, composed by Mark Mercury, who composed a lot of dubbed anime music under his band name Bullets. However, beyond the opening, the dub actually retained Seiji Yokoyama's score, although vocal songs have been taken out, and some of the track placement does differ from the original version. But aside from pedantic nitpicks, having the original music is a pleasant surprise. Even more of a surprise is the accuracy of the script. Character names were naturally changed, most notably the Mazone alien race became the Zetons, but aside from that, it's genuinely commendable how much this dub maintains the original integrity of the Japanese version. The only real criticism I have against it is some of the voice acting is less than stellar. Harlock in particular, while he retains his stoic and mysterious nature, perhaps he's a bit too monotone here, and often invokes a sense of disinterest.
Harlock.
My little Maya, we meet for the first time in a year, and you greet me with tears. Now let me see a smile.
Though, despite being a decent production on its own merits, the way it's presented on this VHS release is nonsensical, as upon the ending of the first episode, it does an immediate hard cut to episode 9, with no real effort to explain much of what happened in between, which would have no doubt confused anyone who may have rented this tape when it came out. If that weren't enough, the end of episode 9 cuts to the ending sequence for a few seconds before abruptly cutting off. There are no credits whatsoever here, and we really have no idea who exactly worked on this dub, although it does sound quite similar to their dub of the Little Lulu anime, which also got a VHS release around the same time, which actually does have some credits at the end, although Googling these names unfortunately doesn't yield any significant results. The audio from the episodes on this first VHS also served as the basis for a vinyl record soundtrack, but what's worth noting is that this album actually features a new soundtrack composed entirely by Mark Mercury's Bullets. I've uploaded the entirety of this album to my second channel, the Fumecom Archives, if you're curious about it. While I enjoyed watching these two episodes, The follow-up to it absolutely broke me. This VHS seems unassuming, and honestly has better looking packaging than the first volume, but that's where the compliments end, as shortly after popping in the tape and being reintroduced to the character of Harlock, even a kid would be able to notice the completely different voice cast. The soundtrack made for the record has made its way here, completely replacing the Japanese soundtrack, and if that weren't enough, it would seem someone on the production end thought, you know what, we might have done too good of a job with the last dub. Let's just throw out our scripts and turn this dramatic, epic space opera into a farcical comedy. But that's the thing. I don't know if this was intended to be a comedy, or if the writing is just that incompetent.
Yes! It's me. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?
You're so mean.
Mean? I'm a killer, kid!
Only it wasn't a person, Dad. I think it's a woman.
The Take to the Sky theme song was in all honesty pretty catchy, but by the end of the 2 episodes on this tape, you'll never want to hear it again, as they find moments to play it multiple times in the background.
I'll be your captain. We'll fly till we're free. Find your place in time. Just follow me.
And it's not something they're shy about.
Take to the sky. Something's fishy. Boy, look at him take to the sky. Who was that man with the patch? Take to the sky!
Oh, but not everything was lost in translation. At least they kept Maya's ocarina theme. Oh, what's that? You don't like Maya or her annoying ocarina theme? Well, this dub has you covered, as they literally kill her off. They then proceed to claim that Harlock no longer has a reason to fight the Zetons due to her demise, and then he fights them again at the end of episode 3. I'm at an utter loss with this. I've always been an apologist for dubs, but I can't think of any justification for this one being the way it is. How do you go forward, yet simultaneously regress so much? Harlock went from a reserved badass to a psychopath, and a creepy psychopath at that.
Hey, I love you.
I have a floor to clean, Harlock.
What a gal.
The fact that the people directly responsible for these dubs are also unknown adds even more to the madness. I will probably die never knowing what the rationale was behind this dub. Most presume these tapes were just 2 different unsold pilots, and while that does make sense to an extent, since when have companies ever been known to release their failed pilots onto dedicated home videos? I don't know, but what I do know is that within context, this is one of the craziest anime dubs I've ever seen. A few years later, in 1985, Harlock managed to somewhat make his debut on American television, thanks to the rather infamous Harmony Gold. But even if you were around back then, the chances of you actually remembering this are probably slim to none, as their adaptation only made it to a few select markets across the country, while Robotech was, by comparison, dominating the airwaves. Now don't forget, this is Harmony Gold we're talking about, and if you were anticipating a straightforward adaptation of the anime, then unfortunately you would be mistaken, as what we're presented with here is an amalgamation of Captain Harlock and Queen Millennia, literally presented as Captain Harlock and the Queen of 1,000 Years, but most stations promoting the show simply referred to it as Captain Harlock. As with Robotech, the stitching together of multiple properties was a necessary evil at the time to give the series a chance at being picked up in syndication, as at least 65 episodes needed to be produced. The original Harlock anime, of course, only had 42 episodes, and even if they had licensed the newer Endless Orbit SSX series, that would have still left them 1 episode short. So ultimately, the decision was made to license Queen Millennia in its place, and somehow figure out how to stitch it together. And by golly, they did. It should be noted, though, that even though it sounds like it, this isn't just Robotech with a Matsumoto skin. The 2 shows are actually edited into each other, despite the fact that, in universe, they both originally take place 1,000 years apart from each other. Going into this dub, I have to admit that I'm honestly not too familiar with Queen Millennia, but I somehow doubt familiarity would have helped much, as by virtue of trying to combine the two stories, it makes the resulting narrative an overcomplicated mess. You can tell that early on, at least, there was more effort put into the Harlock half of the production, and try as they might, the Millennia portion still felt ill-fitting in comparison. And to compensate, there is a copious amount of overly verbose narration explaining how all the characters are related to each other. That's probably the best they could have done, though, to connect everything. However, even scenes that don't really require such detailed explanations got them anyways.
The little girl waits patiently to see what will happen, instinctively aware that Colonel Kamarov is laying some kind of trap for her guardian. With a nod to that ancient intuition of womankind, she prays that no harm will befall her beloved Harlock, unaware that he is under the protection of another woman from an alien planet. For at this very moment, Harlock's movements are being carefully monitored by Melody from the bridge of the great space galleon Arcadia. And as Maya's thoughts grow increasingly somber, a solitary figure appears on the desolate seawall and glides like a phantom toward the troubled little girl.
Inherent features of dubs from the era are character name changes and a replaced soundtrack, and that's no different here. And while I could make fun of the name changes and point out how inferior the new music is compared to Yokoyama's epic original score, it feels more dignified than what Ziv ended up doing. The one consolation to take from this, however, which you could pretty much take from most Harmony Gold dubs, is the excellent voice acting. And considering the overly complicated nature of this dub, combined with the incredibly rushed production schedule, I feel that's no small feat. In the end, though, despite making it to TV, this wasn't enough to lift the anime out of esoteric territory in the United States. And this dub never made it to home video in any way, only surviving today thanks to fan VHS recordings. Despite its limited release and chaotic nature, this has prevailed at being the most complete dub the anime ever received, so credit where credit's due, I guess. And it's certainly a unique piece of anime localization history, but most definitely not worth a serious watch. After Harmony Gold's dub faded in the wind, Harlock wouldn't get touched again until 2009, just a little over 30 years after its initial broadcast in Japan. This dub was brought to us courtesy of Toei themselves, who commissioned William Winkler Productions to take a number of episodes and edit them together into 2 feature-length films. This was made around the same time as a bunch of other dubs of Toei properties, done in the same fashion. There wasn't a whole lot of press about it, and what little there was has mostly been wiped from the internet. From what little I was able to gather, however, it seems that Kozo Morishita, a producer at Toei, is the one who approached William Winkler to create these dubs. The mentality being that worldwide audiences would be more receptive if the episodes were edited into films. Toei being somewhat directly involved with the production of this dub would logically instill confidence in most. However, before even talking about the dub itself, the video quality will immediately send red flags. It's a super low resolution cropped to widescreen, with a very gaudy looking logo superimposed over the original. The audio for the intro is just a reorchestrated version of the original theme, with sound effects that are way louder than they should be. But once the intro is over and characters start talking, any hope of a genuinely enjoyable viewing experience will be thrown out the window. As the intro alluded to, the sound mixing is really bad. The voices overpower the music and effects by a mile, and the acting itself is rather hokey. But perhaps the greatest offense of this dub is the constant pirate lingo added into seemingly every other line.
Avasti, who are you? I don't have patience for stowaways. Ahoy! Wake up, Daiba. Oh.
This is the second homeland for the mighty Mazone? That's what's written?
Well, blow me down.
I don't think the pirate talk would be so bad, though, if the acting was a bit better. I don't think these actors lack talent, rather this dub was seemingly done in one take. The actors often speak with odd inflections, and sometimes there are awkward pauses in the middle of dialogue. It's fairly obvious that this was a rush job. To give it one compliment, though, It is fairly accurate to the Japanese version, but chances are you'll probably be too distracted by the obnoxious pirate talk and awkward acting to make note of that in the first place. Look, William Winkler seems like a nice guy, but someone who makes stuff like this...
Why, that slimy sea dog has superhuman strength! Whom in Hades are you? I'm the Double D Avenger, and all three of you are coming with me to this
wouldn't be my first choice to dub an anime. Now, although it would seem that our journey is basically over, we actually do have one more thing to cover that I don't believe too many people are aware of. So chances are, if you've looked into the first Ziv dub, you may have seen rumblings about that dub having been made in Japan by Toei themselves. But where did this line of thinking come from exactly? Well, for one thing, Toei was producing their own English dubs for some of their shows in the late 70s. The most famous example being their Mazinger Z dub, which actually had limited broadcasts in the US. Alongside this dub, there was a vinyl record release containing the English versions of the opening and ending songs. With that in mind, some people noticed that there existed a record in Japan labeled Captain Harlock English version, and assumed that it contained the same audio that would eventually be released by Ziv. However, the idea of that just didn't sit right with me. As I said before, while it may just be a coincidence, I felt the first Harlock dub sounded pretty similar to Ziv's dub of Little Lulu, which we know wasn't recorded in Japan. Also, while information about this album was definitely available online, nobody had actually posted any audio from it anywhere, as far as I could search. So it didn't feel right to assume that this and the first Ziv dub were one and the same. And if it was a different dub, then it was in desperate need of preservation. So I went searching on Japanese auction sites, and eventually got lucky and found one for a price I was willing to pay. It took a few weeks to show up, but when it finally did, I put it in my record player, and sure enough, it is indeed a different dub than anything else that exists online. So does this mean that Toei did make their own dub internally before Ziv ever got their hands on it? Well, I can't say that for a fact, but I definitely think it's on the table. Will we ever see that materialize if it exists? I don't know, but what I do know is that we at least have a piece of it preserved now, and if anyone would like to listen to it, I'll have a rip of it uploaded to my second channel around the same time this video is live. Who would have thought that one anime could have struggled so much in the process of translation and localization? While Harlock isn't alone in this, it's almost bittersweet to see how successful and popular he was in other countries. In retrospect, it seems like it wouldn't have been so hard to get things right in America, but hindsight is 20/20 after all, and I'm just thankful for the amount of Harlock media available today viewable with subtitles. We could have lived in a world where Captain Harlock and the Queen of 1,000 Years was a major success, and Harmony Gold could have held the original anime captive like they have with Macross. So I would say in the end, we certainly aren't living in the worst timeline. With all that said, I thank you so much for watching this video, but until next time, this has been Fumecom, and for the time being, I'm going to do literally anything that doesn't involve listening to Take to the Sky.
It's a super summer on Channel 11. The Earth and all her creatures are trapped in a tangled web of destruction spun by an extraterrestrial alien force whose capacity for evil is beyond imagination. Only a handful of renegade patriots and their gallant leader, Captain Harlock, can save the human race from this collision course with destiny. Take a thrilling journey through time and space and share the continuing freedom quest of Captain Harlock.
Weekday mornings at 7:30 on KTVT Channel 11, the super ones for kids.